night that felt unnatural, the kind that pressed down on you from all sides. The wind howled against the windows of our small, run-down apartment. Snow had been falling steadily all evening, and it was beginning to accumulate on the streets, turning everything outside into a white, blinding blur. But it wasn't the snowstorm that had my mind racing. It was the rent. Cris and I had lived in this place for over a year, but it seemed like we were always a step behind, just barely scraping by. And this month, well, we were behind, and then some. I glanced at the clock. The rent was due tomorrow, and we had nothing. No money, no plan, and no way out of the situation. The weight of it was suffocating. My stomach churned in anxiety. How had we gotten to this point? How had it all gone so wrong? Cris was pacing back and forth, muttering to himself, probably thinking of ways to get the money. I wasn't sure if he even had a plan. He was always the optimistic one, the one who believed that things would somehow work out. But tonight his optimism seemed forced. I could see the panic in his eyes. He knew what was at stake. I was about to suggest we try to work something out with our landlord when the phone rang. Cris froze in mid-step. I stared at the receiver like it was a snake coiled up, ready to strike. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. A pause on the other end. Then a voice, gravelly and low, spoke. "We have a job for you," the voice said, its tone curt and direct. "It's simple. Help us out, and we'll pay you $500. Cash." I blinked, not sure if I was hearing this right. It almost sounded too good to be true, but desperate times called for desperate measures. "A job?" I repeated, trying to process it. "What kind of job?" The voice didn't answer my question directly. "Meet us in an hour. We'll explain everything then." Before I could ask more, the line went dead. I sat there, staring at the phone in confusion. Cris was already eyeing me with a mix of disbelief and hope. I put the receiver down, and we exchanged a glance. There was no way we could pass this up. $500 would solve everything. Rent, bills, food, all of it. We grabbed our jackets, shoved our wallets into our pockets, and rushed out the door. The snowstorm outside had intensified, but we didn't have time to waste. We had to get to the location we were given in the mysterious phone call. As we pulled out of the parking lot, the cold air hit us, sharp and biting. It was one of those nights when you could almost feel the world closing in around you. The streets were nearly empty, save for the occasional headlights of other cars rushing through the storm. The directions led us out of town, further into unfamiliar territory. After a few miles, we turned off the main road onto a narrow, winding path. Springfall Road. The name alone sounded strange, but it was the only option. I glanced over at Cris. He seemed unnerved, glancing nervously at the road ahead. "You ever heard of this place?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "No," I replied, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "But we need that money." We drove for what felt like hours, the snow thickening, the trees surrounding us growing denser. The road was barely wide enough for the car, and with every turn, it felt like we were getting deeper into some forgotten part of the world. A part of me wondered if this was a mistake. What kind of job would require us to drive into the woods in the middle of a snowstorm? Then, the radio crackled to life. Static. Then, a voice, low, distant, almost imperceptible. "Don't go down that road," the voice whispered. Cris stiffened beside me. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," I muttered, my voice tense. "Probably just interference from the storm. We're far out here." But even as I said it, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It wasn't just the snowstorm that made the air feel so heavy. It was something else. A feeling that the world was somehow different here, something I couldn't quite explain. We continued down Springfall Road, the snow falling faster, blurring the headlights. The trees grew thicker, casting long, dark shadows across the path. The night seemed to swallow us whole, and for a brief moment, it felt like we were the only two people left in the world. Suddenly, I saw a figure ahead, a small, pale shape standing alone in the distance, barely visible through the storm. My heart skipped a beat. "Is that?" I whispered, squinting through the windshield. Cris leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "A girl? What the hell is she doing out here?" I slowed the car, cautiously approaching the figure. The girl was standing still in the middle of the road, her small frame barely visible through the snow. As we got closer, I could see that she was limping, her face pale and strained. She was alone, and her clothes looked torn, as if she had been out here for far too long. We pulled up to her slowly, I rolled down the window, trying to keep my voice calm. "Hey, are you okay? What are you doing out here?" She looked up at us, her big, frightened eyes filled with desperation. "I'm lost," she said, her voice trembling. "I hurt my leg. I need help. My house is close by, just a little ways down the road." Her voice was quiet but insistent, and something about her pleading made it hard to say no. We both hesitated for a moment, unsure, but she seemed so small, so helpless. Without thinking too much about it, I opened the door and helped her into the back seat. Her leg was clearly injured, swollen and bruised, but she was still breathing heavily, her eyes darting nervously around. "Where's your family?" Cris asked, glancing over his shoulder at her in the rearview mirror. She didn't answer right away. They're not here anymore," she said after a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name's Mary Thompson." The name struck me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't place why, but something about it felt wrong. Maybe it was the isolation of the place. Maybe it was the strange, eerie feel of the night. I looked at Cris, who seemed just as unsettled. We both knew there was something off about this girl, but she needed help. "Mary," I asked gently, "how did you hurt your leg?" She didn't answer. She just looked at us with those big dark eyes and said, "My house is just ahead. Please, I need to get home." We didn't ask any more questions. We started driving again, the headlights cutting through the swirling snow. We drove for a while, the car's tires crunching through the thick snow. The little girl, Mary, didn't speak much more after that. She was quiet, her face pale and tired, her breathing shallow. It felt like we were heading deeper into some forgotten world. After a while, she pointed ahead. "My house is there," she said. I slowed the car as we approached a small, isolated house nestled between the trees. It was old, dilapidated, the windows dark and empty, the kind of place that gave off an uneasy vibe. Something about it made my stomach tighten. We stopped the car, and Mary didn't say a word. She opened the door, stepping out of the car. Her limp was pronounced now, but she moved toward the house as if she knew it by heart. She didn't look back at us. "Mary, wait," I called out, but she didn't turn around. Before I could get out of the car, she was gone, vanishing into the darkness of the woods. Cris and I sat there, staring after her, a strange chill running down our spines. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. We sat there in silence for a moment before Cris spoke. "We should go check on her, make sure she's okay." I nodded, still unsure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. We couldn't just leave her out here in the snow, could we? We got out of the car, grabbing our flashlights, and began walking toward the house. The snow crunched beneath our boots, the cold air biting at our skin. The house looked abandoned, its roof sagging, the windows shattered, the door hanging off its hinges. We approached the front gate, and that's when I saw it. A gravestone. It stood just beside the gate, partially covered in snow. But the name etched into the stone was unmistakable. Mary Thompson, 1988-1999. I froze. "Cris, look at this," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He stumbled forward, his face drained of color. "No way," he muttered. "This can't be right." But there it was, a tombstone bearing the name of the girl who had just been in our car. The same name, the same age, but this girl, this Mary, had died over 25 years ago. Our minds raced as we stood there, staring at the grave. We both realized the same thing at the same time. We had driven with a ghost. Suddenly, the car's radio flickered to life again. The Thompson family, killed by their daughter, Mary Thompson, on a snowy night. She murdered her family, and they found her body in the basement. Her leg was broken, and they buried her in front of the house. I turned pale. I could hardly breathe. The voice on the radio continued, its tone colder now. Mary's spirit still roams these woods, searching for those who crossed her path. The voice cut off. We stood there in stunned silence, unable to move, unable to process what we had just heard. And then, from the darkness of the woods, I saw her. Mary. Her pale face stared back at us, her eyes wide and unblinking. She stood at the edge of the trees watching us, her figure barely visible in the falling snow. "Get in the car," Cris whispered urgently. "Now." We ran back to the car, our hearts racing, but the snow seemed to swallow us whole. We climbed into the car, locking the doors as we tried to start the engine. The car sputtered, but it wouldn't turn over. It was as if something or someone was preventing us from leaving. Then I saw it, in the rearview mirror. Mary. She was sitting in the back seat. I screamed, but before I could react, the car veered off the road. The snow had turned the path into a slick, icy mess, and I lost control. The tires slid, the steering wheel jerked in my hands, and before I could do anything, we slammed into a tree. The world went black. When the authorities arrived the next morning, they found the car wrecked, its windows shattered. There was no sign of me. Cris was dead, his body slumped in the passenger seat, his face frozen in terror. The car was empty, save for the faint sound of wind howling through the broken windows. But there were footprints leading from the wreckage, and they disappeared into the woods. To this day, people who live near Springfall Road speak of the strange, ghostly happenings in the woods. Some say the spirit of Mary Thompson still wanders the forest, calling out to those who venture too close. Others claim that her laughter can be heard on the wind, or that her presence can be felt as you drive down the lonely road. And as for me, I'm still out there, somewhere between life and death, trapped in the fog, lost in the woods, searching for a way back.